Hello, everyone. I can't see all of you, but thank you for joining us today. It's a beautiful day out. It's a little cold, but it's still beautiful out. We have a special meeting today with our Congressman, Jim McGovern, and we feel lucky to have him here to talk about a very important topic on voting rights and election integrity. The way this will work is Congressman McGovern will start off with some remarks. Bonnie Isman will be our moderator. She'll tell you about how to access the question part so that you can ask your questions. And we hope we'll get to everyone's question. And I wanted to say, of course, all of you know as league members that the league is nonpartisan. But issue of voting rights and integrity of our elections have been priorities since the league began over 100 years ago. And it seems like these issues are now back in the forefront and really under a lot of fire. So we're interested to hear what is happening now in that area. So I'd like to introduce Bonnie Isman, who will be our moderator. So Bonnie.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you very much. And thank you again to Congressman McGovern for joining with us. And just to remind everybody that he is our congressman in the 2nd Congressional District, but he has been in the Congress since 1997. Does that make 25 years?
Yeah.
So we are in the company of someone who is well versed in how the Congress works. And he's even gotten now into more of a leadership position with the chair of the Rules Committee. So we are really hearing it from an important source of information of Congress. The whole idea about focusing on elections is something the League has done since it was founded, trying to get the vote for women. So I think this is a really appropriate topic. And I'd just like to say that on the local level, of course, our league has been trying to promote the Votes Act here in Massachusetts, which still has not been resolved. So please stay tuned as we watch what happens in conference on the Votes Act here this session. We're also going to be working on trying to get more participation for people of color, in particular in our local government. So that's something else that our league has been working on through the Racial Justice Committee. Jim, we have asked you here in particular about the votes, about voting rights and election integrity. And I wondered if you could start us off with a sort of a summary or some comments about what happened to the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act. Where are we with that? I know the House passed it. And where are we now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you, Cynthia. And thank you to everybody on this call. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you. You know, I used to have a history professor who used to end every class the same way. He would end by saying, "Remember, the world will not get better on its own." And when I took the class, to be very honest with you, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but I do now. Nothing of any consequence happens unless people come together and demand that it happen. I mean, that was the case with voting rights to begin with. My friend, the late John Lewis, would always tell us that voting rights just didn't happen. It took years of struggle, protests, people engaged in civil disobedience, people writing their elected officials, going to rallies, constantly speaking up about it. And he was a man who literally risked his life for voting rights. I went with him to Selma, Alabama on many occasions. We symbolically walked over the Eden Pettus Bridge where he was beaten almost to death by Alabama state police. And he would say that the vote is not only precious, it is sacred. And I agree with him. And so with regard to the legislation that you just mentioned, I mean, we are of the same mindset of John Lewis, that voting rights is precious, almost sacred. And everybody in this country ought to have the right to vote, and that right ought to be protected and upheld. And period. I mean, that should be it. So we passed legislation in the House to protect voting rights and to uphold election integrity, because the challenge now is not just about voter suppression, and it is about voter nullification. It is about votes being counted, not like the results of the votes, putting in a process that could just nullify the entire election. So we passed some strong legislation in the House. It was unfortunately very partisan in terms of the vote, and then it went to the Senate. Now the problem in the Senate is that you have a filibuster issue, and if you don't have 60 votes, you have the Republicans can frustrate your effort to proceed and block any attempt to even bring a bill up, and that's what's been happening. And some of us tried to persuade Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, both Democrats. We try to persuade them who have said they don't want to touch the filibuster rule, whether or not they could find a way to at least make an exception when it comes to voting rights or civil rights. And they said no. So we are at a standstill. There's no date certain when there'll be a debate or whether we can even get it to the floor. To try to rewrite the bill to pare it down. That still didn't persuade any Republicans to get on board. So, we're at a problem where we are is the Senate is stalling.
Thank you for the update. It's a complicated issue, obviously. Something else that we've heard about is that there is pressure being put on election officials across the country, not particularly so much in Massachusetts, but secretaries of state who don't want to run for re-election and actual election officials that are being harassed and threatened because of their attempt to maintain impartiality. Are there things that can be done to protect them and to keep our elections secure?
Well, we have to start paying attention to Secretary of State races. We have statewide elections, and over the years, let's be honest, the Secretary of State's race hasn't been the most exciting of races. I think we always just kind of assumed that whoever Secretary of State wouldn't try to rig an election or wouldn't try to nullify an election. And that's all changed in the last few years. And so there is a much more concerted effort to try to elect secretaries of state, Democrats and Republicans, who will respect voting rights, who will promise not to reverse the results of an election. So I guess what's being done is more attention to trying to elect people who will do what we want them to do in terms of being impartial. Look, we all want to. I mean, those of us in politics, I want to win all the time, but sometimes you don't. And when you don't, you don't. If you lose, you go back, you regroup, you figure out how you could do better, how you could reach more voters, and then you go back again. But it is totally unacceptable to say that I lost an election, so I'm gonna just lie and say it was rigged, and I'm gonna have a partisan board in place that could basically nullify that. It's undemocratic, it's un-American, it is basically the antithesis of everything that John Lewis and so many others struggled for. So look, I'm gonna just be very blunt with everybody here. I don't think voting rights or the vote has ever been under such intense threat in my memory. And this is not just about a rigged election in one county or in one state. I mean, we saw an effort to try to undo an election where millions and millions and millions of people voted for Joe Biden. Not a single bit of evidence to say that it was anything but a free and fair election. We saw an attempt to try to nullify it. to try to end it, to reverse the results. And I will tell you, if that is allowed to stand, or if that gains traction, that's the end of this democracy. I mean, we are at a crossroads right now where, I mean, we are staring in the face of whether we go down a road of toward authoritarianism, toward, where people don't matter, or whether or not we preserve our democratic institutions and our democratic system. I mean, I know it sounds dramatic, but it is where we are. And I think we're going to know the answer to that question in November, because I think that is, it's the Secretary of State's race, and it is who is controlling the Congress beyond November that's going to make the determination of whether or not we're going to strengthen voting rights or whether we're allow it to be weakened.
That's a big warning and a wake-up call for all of us, I think. The other thing that has been really disturbing, at least when I look at it, is the growth of dark money in politics. And at this point, are there measures being discussed as how we can further control this and perhaps dilute the influence of big corporations and other groups that attempted to buy the election?
Yeah, it is a big problem. And there are only two ways to, well, maybe 2.5 ways to control it. One is by congressional action, 2 is by judicial action, and 3 is by the individual candidate's own behavior, and what they will accept and what they will not accept. Look, in Congress, I mean, we passed a bill that I think goes a long way to exposing, to limiting dark money and to having more transparency. I mean, we don't even know, when we talk about dark money, we don't know who's giving to these campaigns.
Right.
You give to me, I have to write your name down and your contribution, who you are, your occupation, on and on. These dark money campaigns, I mean, who the heck knows who's given to them? There's not transparency. So there needs to be a minimum transparency. And we need to figure out a way to get money out of politics. That's where we passed a bill in the House that moved us closer to enabling people to run for office with public financing. And I still believe that that's the best way. But we have the filibuster problem in the Senate. So what we did in the House is like sitting there in the Senate, just like the voting rights legislation. And then the other way is the courts. But as you know, the Supreme Court has been issuing lousy decisions on money in politics for several years now. And they have opened it was Citizens United, have opened the door wider to dark money. So I'm really excited that Judge Jackson is on the verge of making history and being approved by the Senate to be on the Supreme Court. But we need more people like her on the Supreme Court, and that may take some time. And then the other halfway, I say half because it's imperfect, but look, people who run for office, ought to make some pledges, right? Like, I mean, my fundraiser hates me for this, but I thought it was the right thing to do, in part because when I was campaigning, and especially in Amherst and Northampton and other small towns and even big cities, people would say to me, how can you take corporate PAC money and have us believe that you care more about people than corporations? And I'm like, well, look at my voting record. And, but then the more I thought about it, the more I said, I thought to myself, the issue is not just my record, it's the perception. And if the perception of people increasingly is that Congress is wholly owned by big corporate interests, that obviously diminishes people's confidence in the institution, and also people's feeling that it matters that they participate in the process. So I took a pledge to say, look, I will not accept corporate PAC money. And it happened to coincide when I became chairman of the Rules Committee, when people wanted to give me more money. I would have people ask me, why don't I have a huge war chest? One is I don't spend all my time raising money. 2, there's money I don't take. And I think we ought to ask more and more candidates to do that. I get the issue about unilateral disarmament. You don't want to disadvantage yourself, if you, because the other person will take it and make more, and money plays a big role in campaigns. But on the other hand, it's, we have to start figuring out ways to reverse the trend, which is going more and more toward money, not just dark money, but money everywhere. So those are there's not a lot of like hopeful news in the immediate term, but those are the ways to influence this. And that's why elections matter.
It's about time to start looking for questions from our people who are come here. So league members, if you want to use the chat box, please do type in a question in the chat box. If you prefer to raise your hand, I think Kathy's made it possible to raise your hand at the raise your hand thing. So if you'd like to chime in, please feel welcome. And I see Sherry Wilson has got her hand raised, so maybe we can go to Sherry.
Thank you. Congressman McGovern, I have always felt that I should not be contributing to campaigns in other states. That much as I would like Mark Kelly to be elected in Arizona, I felt that it's not up to someone in Massachusetts to help him financially. I'm beginning to change my mind on that, but I'm wondering how you feel about out-of-state contributions. And also, I always feel it's not a big thing for me to write to you about voting rights or other issues, because I know how you stand and I approve it. But is there any point in my writing to Mitch McConnell, or is it just going to go into the circular file?
Well,
So
first,
those are my two questions.
thank you. Those are good questions. So first of all, with regard to contributing out of state, I have no problem with that, because the bottom line is that, people, especially in the federal government, whether it's in Congress or the Senate, I mean, they're going to be voting on issues that are going to impact you in Massachusetts, whether it's climate, whether it's agricultural policy, whether it's getting money out of politics. So, I mean, a member of Congress influence is not just their district, it is nationwide and sometimes worldwide. So I think there's a strong case to be made that we should care about who's getting elected in other states. So I would encourage you to support good candidates wherever you see them. And when you do, it'll be open and transparent. So you're not like dark money, where I'm not going to know who you are, or where you may be an oil company, give dark money campaigns. I mean, you can't do that when you give individually. Secondly, is it worth writing to Mitch McConnell? I always say to people, I think it is. The reason why is because I don't want him to think that nobody doesn't disagree with him. It may not necessarily change his vote, or it might, depending on how many people are writing and emailing and calling. But I do think it's important for people to know what other people are thinking in this country. I mean, I get lots of mail, from all over the country as well. When I get on the floor and I say things, my switchboard lights up, and I get emails and all this kind of stuff. And I can tell you that I'm not particularly popular in Oklahoma right now, but anyway, but beyond that, but it's nice to know that's not going to be where I vacation or I go visit anytime soon. But anyway, point of the matter is that, I think when we all weigh in, even if it's outside of my district, outside of one's district, the collective voices, including some in the district, I think just get amplified even more. So I think it's worth doing. And I even say that about writing to the president. When the president does something you like, he doesn't like, I mean, I don't expect Joe Biden any more than, or Donald Trump or George W. Bush or Barack Obama to read every single letter. But I do know they get a tally every day of what people are calling in about or writing about. I just think it's helpful that, you know, they know that there are people that like what they're doing or don't like what they're doing.
Thank you very much. You've clarified two things that were keeping me awake at night. So now I can change my way of operating.
Thank you, Sherry. Ann, do you want to ask your question?
Me?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear right. Yeah, and it sort of relates to what Sherry was talking about. I sort of feel I'm like one little person in this huge fight that we're in. And I've been writing postcards to voters in other states to get them to sign up for voting by mail and stuff like that. And I guess I'm wanting, and I have been giving money to out-of-state candidates, although it appears if I give once, then I get a million emails asking for, which is kind of irritating, but I understand. Are there other things that you can, suggest that we as individuals can do to get more people to vote? What can we do?
Yeah. Well, look, I think, we all have friends, relatives, people we went to school with, live out of state. Christmas card list, wedding list, you name bar mitzvah list. Whatever. When I decided to run for Congress, that's how I started going through the list of people, not just in my district, but all throughout the country, who said, look, this is what I feel strongly about this. I hope you do too. Not everybody agreed. But those who did said, well, give me some more information, and they could amplify it in whatever state that they're in. In these midterms, we're going to be doing phone banks from Massachusetts into key districts to try to help get people to understand the importance of voting. The other thing is talking about issues, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think we talk about all the challenges outside of Massachusetts, but let me tell you one thing I'm worried about is, we all focus on the, congressional, senatorial, presidential races, or the gubernatorial races. I worry about school boards and select boards and city councils, because there's a concerted effort to get people onto those in those platforms who have dramatically different views than I would guess most of the people the Zoom call have. And a lot of those are nonpartisan races, so it's like popularity contests, or elect me and because I care about schools. And then they get elected, and then you find out they have a very different agenda. They want to ban certain books from schools. They want to have total approval over what a teacher says. They want to micromanage the curriculum, or they want to pursue some conspiracy theory that is not based on reality, and it's very, very destructive. I'm seeing that already in places in my district where, we have people who are, saying critical race theory is being taught in all our schools, and yet they can't even define what critical race theory is. And we have somebody who's attacking a high school, who had a high school group that organized a Black History Month assembly, and they said this shows you what's all wrong with education. Donald Trump Jr. retweeted that, and now these kids have been seeing, very threatening messages posted on the town's, webpage. So all I'm simply saying is that, we got to do a lot of things here. So we got to worry about the national stuff, which is incredibly important, and we got to pay attention to the local stuff. Because the hardcore right wing is finding a way to get onto these boards without people even knowing. We had a school committee candidate in Worcester last time around who, was being endorsed by progressive unions, and because she said that she you used to be a member of a union. And then all of a sudden all this stuff comes out and you realize, well, wait a minute, yeah, she was, but look at all this other stuff, really scary stuff. And we were able to kind of rally at the last minute to expose it and stop it, or from winning, but nobody knew about it. Nobody paid attention to the details. So we have to care about that too.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Martha, would you like to do your question next?
Thank you. Yes, back to voting rights legislation. I mean, it does seem that the omnibus bill that we all would like to see is doomed. But is there anything that could be done to pass even something that was very modest, that tackled even just one aspect? I mean, is there any way for the House of Representatives to come together and pass something, quite limited that the Senate might approve, that would be better than doing nothing at all?
Right. So I think so we're trying to figure that out. And I'm gonna, and I don't want to sound partisan, but I'm gonna just give you my viewpoint of why it's turning out to be difficult, because my sense is that, I mean, you see this in these presidential elections, is that even when some of these Republicans have won, when Trump beat Hillary, he lost a pretty big chunk of the popular vote. And so the base, I mean, so the attraction to some of these very, very reactionary views is becoming less and less and less. So unless you have two choices, you can either change your views or try to adapt them to understand that the American people, want something a little bit different, or you can find ways to make it more difficult for certain people to vote. And the sad choice that I think Mitch McConnell and others have made is the latter. They're not interested in making sure that everybody votes, as evidenced by their endorsement of the Georgia state voting laws. I mean, on what planet does it make sense to say that it's somehow illegal for you to hand somebody, bottled water, who's waiting in line, sometimes for hours, to be able to cast a vote? Like, where's the, why is that so controversial? All this attempt to purge voter lists that you see happening. But as I said at the beginning, we're even beyond the old, let's suppress the vote. Now it's like, even we can't suppress the vote, we want to stack the deck so that we can nullify the elections. The one area where there might be some commonality, I mean, again, whether we can get 60 votes in the Senate or not, is to try to make sure that we don't have a repeat of what we saw on January 6th. And that is, the attempt to nullify electoral college results that were duly certified by the individual states. And there may be there's some talk that maybe we could come together on that, but even that's not clear yet. So, but there are conversations going on. Senator Manchin has been trying is middle ground. But so far as I can tell, he hasn't even been able to pick off Susan Collins or Mitt Romney or Lisa Murkowski yet. So I'm not going to hold my breath that anything significant or even mildly significant can happen on this area. But you know what? People haven't given up. They're still trying.
So it sounds like really the key people are the couple of moderate Democrats in the Senate, that it has to be some agreement in the Senate really first to signal that you people could do anything useful. Is that right?
You're right. We need to get 10 Republicans to agree not to block it from coming to the Senate floor. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we have one yet. So, but they're still trying.
Okay.
Jim, we have two questions coming in on the chat. The
Okay.
first one is there anything Congress might do or may do about gerrymandering in congressional elections? And I had read something that said that 33 states actually do allow their elected officials to be in charge of redrawing the districts. That's not the way it is in Massachusetts, but obviously if they can redraw their own districts, that's what leads to gerrymandering.
So in the bill that we passed on election integrity at the beginning of the session, there was a section in it that called for independent commissions and not legislatures to draw congressional maps, so that, you know, voters would pick their elected officials and not elected officials picking their voters. I think, you know, when I look at the congressional districts, I mean, even though my district seems to sometimes go on forever, it's because of the population. It has nothing to do with, you know, I mean, the idea that, you know, you need what, 800, what is 800, with the exact numbers now, over 800,000 you have to fit into, you know, these districts. But the state Massachusetts state legislature the last 2 times have done, I think, a credible job. Most states have not. And if you look at some of the redistricting that state legislature have done, and I mean, if you were wondering what these people were drinking when they drew the map, right? But what they were doing is cutting a district where everybody thinks the same way. And so there was no chance for, you know, there to be true competition. But I think the way to go is independent commissions. And you know, we're not there yet, but I think that's the way you get a gerrymandering. And I'm hoping that we can get to that point. And, you know, again, how you get to that point is, you know, we have to elect more people who think that way, or people who at least believe that there's merit in debate, even if they're not going to vote for it. And so that requires some careful attention to the Senate and who gets elected, not just in Massachusetts, but in other states as well.
Cynthia, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, and then we have more from the chat?
Okay, this is a kind of a broad question. When you were speaking about how we've got this dichotomy right now, seemingly going down the authoritarian role or path, and then staying with a democracy. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, not specific legislation, but where are we in the big picture? Why is this happening? And what are some of the solutions that you see?
Well, it's happening because we have some leaders who prefer that, and think democracy is messy and it takes too much time. And to some voters, there's an appeal to that. You know, why can't you do this now? You know, and the reality is that we have to win the votes. We have to put it together. And sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it doesn't. And there are people who are impatient. And you add that to the fact that, you know, we have conspiracy theories everywhere you look that get oxygen through social media, and people think all kinds. I mean, some of the questions that I get, you know, I can't even begin to tell you how frustrating it is to try to respond to some of these conspiracy theories. And I think I may have told some of you that after I was one of the last people on the floor on January 6th, and when I came face to face with these insurrectionists, but when I came home, I went food shopping the following weekend. A guy in a suit. You know, we had masks on. He said, "You McGovern?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, isn't it terrible what happened on January 6th?" And I said, "It was." Figuring he was sympathetic, he said, "No." He said, "We almost got fooled. The footage we saw on TV was a lie." He says, "A friend of mine sent me the real footage of the Capitol, and nothing happened that day." And I said, I was there. He said, no, but you got to see this link. I'm like, I don't see, I was there. Well, I'll investigate. So you do that and you get back to me. But I remember going home to my wife and saying, like, I mean, how does someone get like that? And what is, and this guy looked like a business person. How do you, like, what is this about? So the bottom line is that, I mean, we have people, and I like Trump and others who just, want power for the sake of power and don't want to have to deal with anybody who dissents or anybody who, wants to amend anything. You say, I want it my way. I want it now. And, they've got some traction. There's some people who are saying, hey, if we give him all the power, then maybe we can get stuff done quicker. And the problem with all of that is that once we lose our democracy, it's gone. I recently was in my basement here cleaning out books that I've accumulated since high school. My wife's like, why are you keeping your math textbook from? I don't know. You get a clean room out there. And I came across a book that I remember reading in college, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And I started paging through it where places that I underlined and highlighted, and it was chilling. And because it didn't know what you were reading, you could almost apply some of what was in the book to what is happening today. So, as I said before, we are at a crossroads that I don't recall ever being at in my lifetime, where I think we could lose this. This experiment may be over, and I think one of the challenges we have is that when we talk about democracy, we all have a sense about why this is important, but for some people, it's kind of an abstract conversation that doesn't really impact their daily. They don't see how it impacts their daily life. It's not like gas prices, right? Save the democracy. Well, that's like a conversation you'd have at one of the great colleges in Amherst or North or whatever. But it's like, what is that? I'm not going to lose sleep over that. And we have to figure out a way in these next few weeks and months to actually help make the connections to people's real life. Why you need to care about this.
We have another question from the chat, and then we'll go back to the hands up. The question is a little bit off topic, but still a good question. What are the prospects for Biden's Build Back Better agenda? Can some parts of it be passed?
Yes, I believe they can. And we are working on that now. Nothing is done until it's done, but we are going through the entire bill line by line with some of the senators that were problematic to say, what can you live with? What can't you live with? It will not be as bold or as dramatic as the original bill that passed the House. But, let's also be honest enough to say that, almost any piece of that, if it were passed on its own, would be a big deal. I mean, for example, free universal pre-K, that would be a huge deal in any year, right? I mean, that's part of it. Can we keep that? Can we reinstitute the child tax credit? The investments in to combat climate change, can we keep most of that? If we could, that's the biggest, most historic investment combating climate change that we've ever made. Now, is it enough? No, but it's huge. It's huge. And we were talking earlier before this started. I did a tour of some of our maple sugar houses in the western part of my district, and it was. I learned more about maple syrup than I'd ever thought I'd ever know. But it's incredible industry, and I'm now even happy. I'm now even starting to put some maple syrup in my coffee. That's how influenced I was by that. But they're telling me their seasons are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. they're wondering whether or not, their businesses, which many of them have been in their families for generations, will survive many more generations or another generation. Can they make a living on it? Because again, the season gets shorter, the production gets smaller, and what a shame that would be. But that's an example of how climate change is, directly impacting, an important part of our agricultural community. But can we keep that and build back better? And I think there's a good case to be made for that. And, the other stuff, I mean, I like everything in it, more money for affordable housing. How much of that we can keep, we don't know. But the conversations are going on, and we will have a sense whether or not we can get a deal on anything, probably by. And the nice thing about Build Back Better is we don't need 60 votes because we're taking it up under a process called reconciliation, which you only need a majority vote. So in any event, I'm hopeful.
A little good news to mix in with all the rest.
Yeah.
And did you want to ask a follow-up question?
I did. I don't mean to hog the question time here. But going back to what you were saying earlier, Jim, about the fake news that this guy was telling you when you were there. I really feel like that I feel like it is having a major impact on our elections. And I know there used to be something called the fairness doctrine, and it was done away with in the 80s, where, networks used to be required to present, at least attempting to present both sides of an issue. And that hasn't happened for a long time. Do you see any movement or any possibility of reinstating something like the fairness doctrine again, or how that might work?
Yeah. So I for years, I was on legislation to reinstitute the fairness doctrine, and my predecessor on the Rules Committee, who was the chair, Louise Slaughter from New York, was always the author of that bill. And I still think that we got to pursue something like that. Having said that, the times have changed in the sense that it's not just your traditional media outlets that we need to be concerned about. In fact, it's less and less about them and more about what is on social media. I'm always surprised. I mean, I get up in the morning, I turn on the news, I go CNN, MSNBC, and then if I really need a wake up call, I just do a couple of minutes of Fox just to see what they're saying. And I read the New York Times, I read the local papers, I go through all the stuff. It's very kind of old school in many respects, but more and more people don't do that, right? They're getting the news from other outlets, from other other web pages, from podcasts, from other platforms on social media that are a lot more difficult to be able to influence. I wish that the people who run those platforms in which they are located were more concerned about making sure that it's not a place just to spread lies and conspiracy theories, but they seem to be more interested in money and and traffic on their pages as opposed to accuracy and truth. But we need to figure out how to deal with this better, because we're not dealing with it very well. And I can tell that when I come home and I go to coffee shops and I hear what people say. You can tell that when you talk to people who are saying things, or you hear them on talk radio, or you see some of the letters to the editors. And but there's again, if you would have told me when I first got elected that we would be having a discussion like this, I'm not sure I would have believed that we would. I mean, I always thought fact is fact. I mean, this is a pen. This is not a dining room table. We should all say pen, right? But we got people who say it's a dining room table, and it's like, all right, like and say dining room table enough, and it gets repeated on a number of places, and people start calling this a dining room table, and that's what's happening. And I mean, people are entitled to their own opinions. I don't, I mean, I have my views. You have your views, others have very, very different views. That's fine. I can live with that. Even if I disagree with your views, but we ought to not be able, but facts ought to be facts. Science ought to be science. That's what I learned in grade school. And I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with it. I'll just say one thing, what I do now, and I want to encourage you to, it's kind of uncomfortable, but I now get out of my comfort zone. And if I'm in a place where people are saying something that I know is not true, even if they're not speaking to me, I interject myself into the conversation. I do it at family functions. My mother hates it, but I do it because if I don't correct the record, my kids are there. Others are there. They're going to think it's truth. If I'm in Worcester, down the hills, I get my coffee at Dunkin' Donuts in the morning. I go in, there's always 20 old guys talking about how to solve all the world's problems. Usually when I walk in, tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. In the past, I just kind of wave and get my coffee and leave. Now I engage. Because if they're going to tell me things like, that climate change isn't real, or that, we're being invaded by immigrants, or whatever. And if I don't respond to that, there are people in that store who are listening, and they're going to believe them. My wife tells me, learn to use the drive-through. And I'm like, I'm going to do a better job of that because I hurry. But we don't have the luxury of saying any longer that I'm not going to dignify that with a response. I mean, that was the old way I used to think. You say something really, really outrageous, just gonna let it, I'm not going to even engage. I don't believe that anymore because we can't afford to allow these lies to stay unchallenged.
Jim, we have another question on the chat, and it says, do you think that President Biden can do more in terms of executive orders? And if so, what would you like him to do?
I'd like him to do something about student debt, number one. I would, I mean, again, I'm not as kind of a student of government, in a perfect world, you don't like to rely only on executive orders because executive orders can be undone by other executive orders. And I think what we want is policy changes that are more permanent. But having said all of that, I mean, he just they just changed their policy at the border with regard to asylum seekers who they were preventing from applying for asylum by, invoking this FDA rule that said they couldn't come into the country because they might be, a health hazard to our country. I mean, so there are things that he can do through executive order. He's releasing more oil into the market to try to lower gas prices. I wish he would declare the climate change an emergency, and so that we could maybe open the door to other possibilities to more aggressively move to combat climate change. Look, Joe Biden is turned out to be a good president. I don't agree with him on everything. His heart's in the right place. He cares about people. He may not be moving in some areas as quickly, and there's some areas I just disagree with him on. But overall, he's a good person. And I was going through some of my new communities in the western part of the district to Shelburne Falls, Buckland, Ashfield, just to get to know some of these communities in anticipation of the upcoming election. And we had these impromptu meetings. And there was one guy at one of the libraries I was at who was like, well, we really need, you're not moving quick enough. It's not dramatic enough. It's not really making enough of a difference, So, I mean, it's not even worth it. And I looked at him and I was like, I understand the frustration. There's a lot of things I wish we were much farther along on. But here's the deal. there's a lot that's been done that's been really good. I mean, the American Rescue Act, I mean, talk to any town administrator, any man, it literally saved our communities. The child tax credit lowered child poverty. That means fewer children going hungry. That was a good thing. I mean, more shots in arms so that we can actually try to get this pandemic under control so we can go out in person again. All those things are good. Now, do I want more? Yeah. I mean, my politics are to the left. I want Medicare for all. I want a more vibrant commitment to climate change. I want the voting rights stuff that we all care about. I want, I go right down the list. By the way, we did pass a major infrastructure bill. Massachusetts got billions of dollars in infrastructure. So these bridges that have been on hold forever can be fixed. But the deal is we're doing the best we can within the reality that exists. If we had another 10 votes in the Senate and maybe another half dozen votes in the House, then I can understand your frustration about not wanting to participate because there's no really excuse for us not to do more. But given what we're up against, given the closeness, boy, we should be building on this and not throwing up our hands and saying it's not enough. I spoke to a group of students at Deerfield Academy a month ago, and then I did a radio interview with one of them the other day. And she says, what's the advice for young people, at Deerfield? I said, my advice is you are being given a gift, right? An incredible education. You will all go on to college most likely, and that's another gift you're given. And my friend, the late Paul Farmer, who headed up this group called Partners in Health, who just recently passed away, but he always used to say to people, we have all been given gifts. The question is, what are we going to do with these gifts other than enrich ourselves? There's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with being successful, but you have an obligation because of what you have been given to give back, to help make this world this country better. And, when people say to me, they're going to pull the shade because everything's not perfect, I want to scream because, that's not the way it works. And if you pull the shade and you don't participate, I can assure you that, there are a whole bunch of people who have very, very different views who are only more happy to pick up the slack to get their agenda moved forward. So, we all have to be, idealistic. We have to be passionate. We also have to be pragmatic enough to know what the reality is and what we can achieve within the reality that we have.
Janet Chevin, you've been waiting patiently to ask a question. Do you want to go ahead now?
Well, some things have happened in between, but that's good. No, Jim, you want to scream, but I want to cry.
Yeah.
I want to cry many a night, particularly the other night when the governor of Florida sat there as happy as can be with his new legislation. I mean, you talk about things that are happening on the local level, but look at what's just happened in Florida with the intervening on local education and policy and what teachers can and cannot say. That is terrifying, and I do cry. I cry for young people who are probably of the gay and trans and other communities. And we can't touch Florida because we live in Massachusetts.
Well, we have a Senate race in Florida that is tight between Marco Rubio and Val Demings. There are congressional seats that are tight that we need to win or maintain. And, there are a lot of people, including my mother, she still votes up here, who has a condo in Florida. And I give her instructions all the time about what she needs to say at her condo board meetings when people raise some of these issues. But, we have to be, and I'm gonna tell you, it's sickening that in the year 2022, that we are moving backwards. And mentioned the Ron DeSantis's, bill really a bigoted bill that prevents, that really, think about the signal it sends to a young person who is part of the LGBTQ community, that somehow you can't say who you are. We can't educate other people about the diversity in our community, that somehow we think that you are an outcast. I mean, I find that so heartbreaking. But I think we have voices here that we need to use. I mean, if that's the state policy, well, I don't want to support businesses that headquarter in Florida. Disney we have people in Disney who are raising their voices at the higher levels of Disney's executive branch. Let's see whether they can continue to raise their voices. And if they don't, if they cave, I'm not going to Disney World. There's a consequence. We have friends in Florida, we have relatives in Florida. We ought to reach out to them. But Florida, it goes back to what I said, is that there are people running for school board in Massachusetts who believe this, but they're not going to run for school board by saying, I'm a mini Ron DeSantis. They're going to run for school board saying, hi, I'm Joe Smith and I'm a nice guy. Give me a vote for school board or school committee. And a lot of people would just say, oh, he seems like a nice guy, or she seems like a nice person. Well, just vote for them. We have to make sure that we are doing the research on the people who are running for these local issues, because you got a school board here, or you get 2 or 3 people on a school board that feel this way, they can change the policy in a town or in a city. So this discrimination and this bigotry can happen at the state level, at the federal level, but at the very, very local level as well. And I'll tell you, I used to think that the older I got, that the more things would become clear to me. It's the opposite. I mean, in respect. And by that, I mean that I can't quite understand why there are people in this country and around the world who choose to define who they are in their very existence by highlighting their differences with other people. It's such a waste of time. It is so destructive. And much energy. When if we just began, with the proposition that not only we all created equal, but everybody's important, and you are you and I am me, and that's that, right? Let's not focus on that. But discrimination is alive and well. And by the way, we're talking about the LGBTQ community in Florida. Don't forget, I mean, what is particularly startling to me is that we have politicians, including the former president of the United States, who feels that there's no political problem with just being openly racist.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Hatred is the other
Right.
word that you have to think about. Hatred.
No,
There's so much hatred today.
but we need to expose it. We need to correct the record, and we then need to accompany that message of response with a message of hope, love. I mean, I want politicians to use the word love more in their speeches. I want to live in a loving community. And one of the things that my kids are 20 and 23, and they grew up kind of free of prejudice because they grew up in communities where they were very integrated, and there was no judgments. And I said to my wife all the time, we are blessed that this is the way they think. But on the other hand, there are people in politics, there are people in power who, again, it is about, let me drive a wedge. I mean, if I can't make the economy an issue, let me scare you into believing that somehow your children are being indoctrinated with something that's really, really bad. And again, I go back to the example that I said before about the school in Shrewsbury where, this guy is attacking the kids at school who were part of the committee for Black History Month. And it's like, this is crazy, but I have people coming up to me who don't even live in Shrewsbury saying to me, "Oh, what are you going to do about that? I said, well, what's the problem? Oh, there's some controversy. These kids are being brainwashed. I said, with what? Well, I don't know all the details, but I hear it's really bad. Well, but why don't you find out the details? Well, and I have police officers in Worcester who are complaining about what's happening in Shrewsbury in their school. It's a great school. I love the fact that kids are talking about things. And yet, we have this, we have a system in place now, or we have a climate that's in place now where the details don't even matter. It's just if I can scare you into believing that this group is scary or you're just, you're bad, then again, we have these enormous divisions. And but we can play a role in that. We have to make sure that we are vigilant locally. We have to use our voices to point out the truth, and we have to use our voices to remind people that love trumps hate, and it always has, it always will. We can't forget that.
Thank you, Jim. We have a twofer over here with the Van Giels. Would you like to do your question now?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much for spending this time with us. I really appreciate it. Go back to the question of nullification, January 6th, and the question of would it be to advance our democracy or would it be really tumultuous to prosecute Trump? How would you think through the pros and cons of that? What advice might you give the Attorney General?
Well, I haven't spoken directly to the Attorney General, but I've talked to the President about this. And my view is that if the evidence is sufficient enough to bring a case against him, which I believe that there is, but I'm not a lawyer, but if it is determined that the evidence exists to be able to prosecute him, then he should be prosecuted. That to me would be more helpful to our democracy than not. Because if he's guilty of these crimes, and by virtue of the fact that he was president, means that we're not going to pursue it, it's basically saying that we have one set of rules when it comes to justice for regular people, and then we have another set of rules when it comes to powerful people. And I get it. It be a pleasant experience. There'll be a lot of division and polarization in this country. But you know what? I want the history books to say, that we have equal justice under the law. And I think I would like to think we all want that. But he is, every day, he's every day the January 6th committee is revealing more and more information about what happened leading up to and what happened that day. And every day it looks like more and more of this of the origins of what happened in the West Wing. And so I think, and there are going to be primetime hearings coming up in about a month, so the whole country will be able to see this. But I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how this would work out in the court of law. But if it's determined that they get a credible case, they ought to bring it against him. And this last thing about the missing calls. I think it was Rosemary Woods with Nixon. I think it was only a matter of a few minutes erased. This is hours And we know that he had calls with people. We know he talked to Kevin McCarthy. We know he talked to Jim Jordan. We know we talked to a lot of people during that time. So in any event, but I think we should pursue justice in this case, wherever it takes us.
Thank you.
Jim, we have another question from the chat. And this is, what is the status of the GI reparations bill to compensate Black World War II veterans who were denied GI education and housing benefits? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can get back to you on that. I don't know what the status of that is yet. So I will promise I will get you an answer on that. So I probably shouldn't comment unless I know what I'm talking about.
That's great. Any other questions?
I have one. How can
Cynthia?
we, what is your best advice for us to mobilize and have an impact on what's happening right now in voting? Well, there are a lot of issues, but voting rights and election integrity.
So I think my advice is that we can't let up. One of the problems that we have in our kind of our political system as it is that people get focused for, a short period of time, and things either happen or they don't happen. And then we turn our attention to something else. We're going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We're going to have to talk about what's happening, how we deal with our budget, how we deal with climate change, how we deal with, the bigotry that we see popping up all over this country against the LGBTQ community. And we have to constantly go back to voting rights and election integrity. I mean, we have to, that has to always be a staple in whatever presentations we're making. Otherwise, it gives politicians the ability to move on without having resolved that issue. And, I don't know whether or not we can get anything done on this before this session is out. But I think people need to know that there will be a political consequence if they don't address this issue. And I want the political consequence to be that people who don't care about voting rights don't belong in office. But the other political consequence could be that if we don't figure out a way to stop this hemorrhaging here, that we could lose our democracy. And during my little listening tour, people had complaining about the fact that there's not a good message out there, and there's truth to that. I mean, in this day and age when your message has to fit on a Twitter post, too many of us continue to talk, in very detail, which I'm told by experts who sell soap and other products that, if you can't get people in the first 15 seconds, forget about it. I don't like that approach to issues, but I'm understanding you got to do what you got to do. And we have to figure out a way to talk about this where it resonates with people, where it sticks with people, not just like-minded people, but others as well. And so we need to work on that as well. But it's persistence. It's persistence. Like John Lewis. He just never gave up. Never. I always wonder, like, if I went to a protest and someone beat me to the point I almost died, would I get up again and do it again? We all like to think we would, right? But he didn't give up. He didn't give up. And when Lyndon Johnson was saying, I want to put this on the back burner because I need to do some other things before re-election, they an ally on a lot of this stuff, they said, no, you're my friend, but we're going to push you even more. So even amongst our friends, we all can do more, right? We all need to think a little bit more creatively and out of the box how we advance this. So it can't just be it's dead because of the Senate. All right, well, then what's our strategy to make it uncomfortable for those senators who won't even allow there to be a debate on it. And what are the new creative ways we can get at this, or to talk about it where it resonates with more and more people? Because we need people to be intense about this upcoming election. We need people to vote, even with these new restrictive laws. We need them to find ways to overcome them, so that we can elect people at the state level as well as the federal level who can reverse some of the damage that's been done. But I'm grateful to everybody who takes time to talk about these things like we're doing here today, because the only thing worse than, looking at kind of the prospects of what can happen if we don't rise to the occasion is thinking that and believing that there's nobody there who's going to fight back. I mean, I think, everybody on this call, and I don't say this in a partisan way, I just say this as a matter of fact, I think everyone on this call would be what John Lewis would call a troublemaker, making good trouble. And I think that's what we need now. We need to stir things up. We need to get out of our comfort zones, and we need to, understand that this is a fight that if we don't step up, we're going to lose.
Jim, I have a question in chat that may end up being our last question, but it's a good one. The question is, do you see the courts playing a significant role in challenging many of these new state laws that relate to voting and elections? I know we're all thrilled with the possibility of our new justice coming on, but how do you see the court's action in the near future?
So I think that we can get lots of judgments in the mid-level courts that I think could be very helpful. I get very nervous when we get to the Supreme Court. And so, I want Judge Jackson to be approved as quickly as possible, but we still are at a disadvantage. Justice Roberts has turned out to be a swing vote. We're better than being, a reliable vote for all the things that I don't like. But I got to be honest with you, as we, leading the last few days, reading about all the back and forth between Justice Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, and Mark Meadows, trying to undermine a free and fair election here in the United States, trying to nullify it, and wondering, what he knew, and and was he part of this? It makes me nervous about relying too much on the courts. I hope at a minimum he recuses himself in this instance from anything January 6th related. But the people who are the recent the Trump nominees in particular, they're not. You can't. Where they're going to be, right? There's no. Will they be thoughtful? Is there a balance here? Will they weigh all sides? You kind of know where they're going to be, and that's not good for our democracy. It's not good for the court, right? I saw a poll where confidence in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low. That's not good for our system. We need people to have confidence in our democratic institutions, and that includes the courts. So we can get some help at the lower levels, but if it goes to the Supreme Court, I get nervous.
Any last minute questions for Jim McGovern? Jim, thank you so much. Oh, we have one from Ava.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
just,
Yes.
you had mentioned critical race theory early on, and I wondered if you could define it because I find it confusing from what I read about it.
Yeah, I mean, look. So when people say that critical race theory is being taught in our local schools, I mean, I think what they're trying to imply And I've heard this from people, is that somehow students are being indoctrinated to believe that white people are all bad. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but that's the way, the people who go to these school committee meetings and stuff are trying to portray it. And it's like, and the concept of it is not bad at all. I mean, it's got to put things in historical perspective. So when people like Governor DeSantis say, I don't want kids to feel any shame in their learning, with the implication being, if I teach you about slavery and you're white, you're going to feel guilty. I look at it, I mean, it's just a twisted way to look at understanding our history. I look at it this way. I was a history major in college. One of the things I wish was that more people majored in history, because I think having a sense of history helps guide you to make good decisions in the future. So you don't repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. Yeah, we ought to learn about the good and the bad in our history. We ought to learn about things that we should all be proud of, and quite frankly, the things that we should look back with and be with shame. And slavery, Jim Crow laws. I mean, and understanding that we still have a system of discrimination that is in place in this country. I mean, it doesn't mean everybody is a racist. It just means that we have to understand that systems have developed in a way that discriminate against certain people, and we should acknowledge it. And our goal should be, let's all fix it, right? And what is really disturbing about how when Trump says people should fight to the death against critical race theory, I mean, first of all, tell me what it is, where it is in the curriculum. What do you? I don't even know what the hell they're talking about half the time, other than the fact that what they're trying to do is to go back to the old, the old standard, which is, let's drive a wedge between people in this country based on race. We have some members of Congress, including the former president, who say that white people are being discriminated against when it comes to vaccinations. It's just ludicrous, but he said it. And there are people who I bump into at coffee shops and in community gatherings who tell me this. And, what are you talking about? I heard it. And what it does is it makes people feel like they should have a grievance, that somehow they're being, put to the side on behalf of some, what they would call an elitist agenda. Well, equality should not be considered an elitist agenda. It is what our country is supposed to be all about. And so we have to figure out a way to talk about this, because I do think, one is the way it's being presented is twisted and wrong. But I also think it's important for us to reaffirm the fact we need to know about our history. We need to know about what happened in this country. And there are lots of wonderful things that have happened in this country, right? But there were some things that weren't so wonderful. And if you're saying that, we should only think everything was perfect, well, then what's the difference between us and Vladimir Putin's Russia? Let's go right down the list. I mean, but that we're even having this conversation in 2022, that it's a political issue, that there's political advantage to driving a wedge between people based on race, is really stunning to me. It's disappointing and it's disheartening. Very, very sad. And again, we're going to have to figure out a way, especially in the next few months, to be able to talk about this, to put this to rest, but also to be able to make sure we're communicating to the people who are taking this as somehow being real. But it's I don't want to end on a note where like I'm we're kind of dwelling on kind of the negativity here. Look, just so I'll close with this. Because we unelected the other guy and elected Biden, and we have majorities in both House and Senate, we've got an awful lot done. And again, our economy has been saved. We are investing in infrastructure at historic levels. We're bringing down child poverty. We have challenges with inflation. We have challenges with energy costs, which I hope this wakes us up to make a transition away from fossil fuels to cleaner, greener energy. We have to make that choice, but this is an opportunity to be able to pivot. And, there are lots of good things that are on deck that could pop and happen that I think will help benefit this country. We have this terrible situation in Ukraine, which I continue to hope and pray that we can find a way to stop the violence so we can attend to the humanitarian crisis that's at hand. But I'm approaching the next few months, understanding that we got a lot we have to confront, but I'm hopeful. I believe we can figure this out, and I believe we can get it right. And I believe, with a couple of twists and turns, we can get back and fix our election system and put this behind us. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that to do that, all of us have to step it up, including me. We're to figure out new ways to engage on some of these things, and I'm eager and anxious to do so. So I thank everybody on the call for all that you do, for caring, for all the activism locally, statewide, nationally, internationally. I get great hope from the quality and the intensity of questions as well. So thank you.
Jim, you've just demonstrated how you've survived 25 years in the Congress. Got that positive attitude. Marcy, I see that we have missed a chance to get your question in, but I want to just make sure everybody takes a look at the chat to see what a nice welcoming message you left for Jim, that
That's what I wanted
expressing
to
your
say.
gratitude.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. So
Thank you.
Great. And Cynthia,
You're
you want to?
awesome.
Definitely. Cynthia, we'll leave it over to you to wrap up.
Okay, I loved your comment, Marcy. We do want you to take good care of yourself, Jim. You're our man in Congress right now. So we put a lot of faith in your actions and in your beliefs and values. I wanted to ask everybody if thank you all for coming, and Congressman McGovern, thank you for sharing so much.